Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Goveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, kick goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check YouTube, stock prices, sports scores, the news, Pinterest, Reddit. We check all of these products and services because we are feeling something that we do not want to experience. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the book, is that if we keep blaming technology for distracting us, or whatever the latest distraction du jour is, if we keep blaming things outside of ourselves, we don't get to the root cause of the problem.
welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 367 with Nir Eyal. Nir is the best-selling author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. He is taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Hasso Plattner Institute of Design. His writing on technology, psychology, and business appears in the Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. In a world of distraction, the ability to become indistractable offers us a serious competitive advantage. Nir and I unpacked numerous topics on this show, including 1. Why our being so easily distracted goes deeper than our devices. 2. How toxic workplace cultures sacrifice our potential to do great work. And 3. Nir's 4-step research-backed model to become indistractable. With that, I bring you the one and only Nir Eyal. Welcome to the show, Nir.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. And it's funny because when your previous book, Hooked, came out 6 years ago, I remember reading it and thinking, man, this is an awesome book. But I also remember thinking, this is going to unleash a plague of attention merchants onto the world, and people are just going to be powerless. So when you actually released the follow-up, Indistractable, earlier this year, I thought, okay, he's made amends. This is going to help people get unhooked.
Well, wait. Before you go further, have you seen that happen in the past 5 years? Who are the attention merchants that didn't exist before 2014?
Well, I mean, the big ones already existed, right? But there's
exactly. That's what I wanted you to say.
So no,
because then it frees me of responsibility.
It does absolve you of responsibility.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly the point. The reason I wrote Hooked was to steal their secrets.
Mm-hmm.
I really want this point to be very, very clear for folks out there. Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. That book was published in 2014. Well after Facebook and Google and, Instagram and WhatsApp, these companies were around. I wanted to steal their secrets so that the rest of us can use these techniques to build good habits in people's lives through technology. And that's exactly what's happened. So I'll take responsibility for the fact that Fitbod uses the Hooked model to get people hooked to the gym.
Yep.
I'll take responsibility for the fact that Kahoot uses the Hooked model to get kids hooked onto in-classroom learning. I'll even take responsibility for the fact that one of my clients, the New York Times, uses the Hooked model to get people hooked to reading the news every day. Mm-hmm. That I'll take responsibility for. I'm not going to take responsibility for Facebook and Google and Instagram. They knew these techniques, and my goal was to expose them so that the rest of the world can use them for good.
Well, like any tool, right? It comes down to how you use it, and you can use it for good. You can use it to get a streak going on your meditation app. So you're meditating 100 days in a row as opposed to streaking while, say, communicating with a friend on Snapchat and feeling like, oh, I need to communicate with this person in order to keep that streak going, right? So totally.
Yeah, as if that's the worst thing in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What's so
right.
bad about that?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
Yeah. So I mean, nowadays there's a lot of rhetoric out there, and I've published articles on HBR on this topic around external notifications and push notifications and small hacks you can incorporate into your day to help you get more time back and become more indistractable. But your book goes a little bit deeper than that in terms of our biological innate desire is to be distractible. What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I would argue that our species is designed to be perpetually perturbed. That I think a lot of the rhetoric that we hear these days that somehow, our species is designed to be happy, that if you're not happy and satisfied with your life, then something's wrong with you. That is what we hear from some happiness experts out there. And I think that is not true. That just think about this logically from an evolutionary basis, right? If there was ever a group of Homo sapiens who were happy, who were flourishing, who were satisfied, everything was great all the time, those people were probably killed and eaten by our ancestors. Because that would not be evolutionarily beneficial. Our species is designed to be perpetually perturbed. We always want more. We are always dissatisfied. And we have this confluence of cognitive quirks, including the hedonic adaptation, including negativity bias, including our penchant for boredom. The reason that we are constantly distracted is that we always want more. And I would argue that that is actually not a bad thing if you know how to harness it correctly. So one thing I want everyone to remember who's listening is that feeling bad is not bad. It's normal. It's perfectly normal. And in fact, thinking that there's something wrong with you and you have to fix yourself if you feel uncomfortable, no, that's not helpful. In fact, we are designed for that discomfort. So the idea here, is to understand how we can channel that discomfort into helpful behaviors rather than hurtful behaviors.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think it is a bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of people who are sold certain narrative via media that we need to pursue happiness. But ultimately, life is going to be a struggle. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. And if you want to do anything worth doing, then that's going to come with a healthy dose of adversity. And having a more positive relationship with that is just going to help you get closer to your goals rather than cowering at the first sign of difficulty.
And if you talk to people who have all the things that most people want, the fame, the fortune, the wealth, they are also victims of what we call hedonic adaptation. Tells us that, after people win the lottery, they're really happy for a little bit, and then they go back to being just as miserable as they always were. And the same works in reverse, actually. We know that there's cases of people who become paralyzed, and at first they're really, really down about it, but then they go back to their previous level of life satisfaction. So we have what's called a hedonic adaptation, that we adapt to whatever happens in our life, good and bad, that brings us kind of to this baseline happiness level. And so we shouldn't depend upon these extrinsic factors in our life, the external factors that base our self-worth upon or base our decisions on. We should really find ways to make sure that we acknowledge that we will be uncomfortable forever. That's life. No matter what good things are thrown at us or bad things, that state of wanting, that state of craving, that state of never being satisfied is always going to be there. And we see this reflected in many of the world's religion. Buddhism teaches that suffering is eternal. There's nothing we can do about that other than through meditation to absolve ourselves from it. And of course, there are other ways as well. And I would argue that meditation certainly isn't the only way. And I think there are many techniques that we can use in perhaps a balance that, sometimes we want to find ways to free ourselves from this discomfort. And unfortunately, many times people use what's called a distraction to take their minds off of that discomfort. And then other times we want to get up off our butt, stop meditating, and fix the damn problem, right? That not every problem can be solved through, zoning out or by measuring your breath. Sometimes you got to actually fix stuff out there in the world. And so I think that's part of the solution as well.
Yeah. And that's something I think Ryan Holiday alludes to in his latest book, Stillness is the Key. The fact that we have so many distractions on demand nowadays where we can't just disconnect for 5 minutes without feeling the urge to pick up our phones, that we can't ask those bigger questions. It's much easier to just distract ourselves with Netflix or our phones or something else if we have some sense of anxiety, something's not right in our lives, but distraction can help numb that pain as opposed to force us to essentially address it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan Holiday wasn't the first one to say that.
No, of course.
That's a long time.
That's like 2,000 years of wisdom, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this hints upon one I think the biggest revelations that I think most people don't understand when it comes to distraction. Most people think of distraction as just the pings, dings, and rings, right? The external triggers. But I would argue that most distraction starts from within us. That we have to challenge our notion of motivation. That many people don't understand the nature of human motivation. They cling on to this antiquated notion that all human motivation is about the desire for pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Right? We've all heard about carrots and sticks.
Yep.
Turns out neurologically that is not true. That the brain is not motivated by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. That in fact, what's going on in the brain is just one thing, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything we do, okay, everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. We know this to be true physiologically. If you go outside and it's cold, your brain tells you, "Ooh, this doesn't feel good. Put on a jacket." If you go back inside, now it's too warm, the brain tells you, "Hey, that's not comfortable. Take the jacket off." If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. If you're stuffed, oh, you ate too much, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So physiologically, we know this to be true, and the same occurs psychologically. So when we are feeling lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check YouTube, stock prices, sports scores, the news, Pinterest, Reddit. We check all of these products and services because we are feeling something that we do not want to experience. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the book, is that if we keep blaming technology for distracting us, or whatever the latest distraction du jour is, if we keep blaming things outside of ourselves, we don't get to the root cause of the problem. And the root cause of the problem is that time management is pain management. That I don't care what life hacks you've heard about, what books you've read, what guru has told you today's greatest, hits of productivity. Fundamentally, if we don't deal with this fact that it's not the tech that's doing it to us, for God's sakes, it's what's going on inside of us. It is for why we are checking those technologies, what we are trying to get out of our heads by using these different distractions. That is the root cause we have to deal with first and foremost.
Yeah. And essentially what you're hinting at there is also the internal triggers you put forward in Hooked. Essentially the need to socialize. I'm going to pick up my phone and check Facebook because I'm sitting on my couch alone on a Tuesday night watching Netflix, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess on that sort of innate biological drive, I think it was Matthew Bossontier, he's a professor at University of British Columbia. He basically said that conserving energy has been essential for human survival. And so it's allowed us to be more efficient in searching for food and shelter, competing for sexual partners, and avoiding predators. And so when we sit down at our desk in the morning on a Tuesday morning, to avoid pain and to conserve energy, we're far more likely to say, check LinkedIn, check our email for half an hour, respond to emails. That's nice and easy, as opposed to, say, doing the most difficult thing first. I mean, what's your view on that?
I think there's something to that. I'm not sure if it's about energy conservation per se. I think it's about the desire to escape discomfort.
Okay.
That, so many times, I think this is a good place to talk about what is the difference between what is distraction really all about. And so to understand what distraction is, we have to understand what distraction is not. So the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. They both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, anything that pulls you away from what you plan to do with intent. Now, this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, anything can be a distraction. If you sit down at your desk and you say, you know what, now I'm going to work on that big project. Now I'm going to do that thing I've been procrastinating on. Now I'm finally going to get to work and do that thing that I've been putting off right after I check email, right? That is just as much of a distraction as playing a video game. If you wanted to do one thing and now you're doing something else, that is a distraction. And so what many times tricks people are these distractions that feel productive. I call this pseudo work. Right? I got to check email at some point, right? That's kind of a worky thing to do. It's kind of productive, right? But what we do when we give into those distractions is that we prioritize the urgent at the expense of the important. And that is a cancer. We can't do that to ourselves because we never get to the stuff that's actually meaningful. So that's point number one. Anything can be a distraction. Point number two is that anything can be traction. So there's this silly dialogue out there these days that, oh, social media, that's frivolous, and video games, oh, that's just a waste of time. But me watching football on TV for 3 hours, no, that's okay. Why? It's just being a techno-Luddite, right? There's nothing inherently good or bad about these activities. If it's a pastime that you've planned for in advance, and it is according to something that you do on your schedule, not on the app makers, not on the TV schedule, but on your schedule, there's nothing wrong with it. It's absolutely fine. And so I am not one of these, Luddites that says, oh, stop checking Facebook for 30 days, go on a digital detox. Come on, give me a. It's ridiculous. What I say is anything that you plan to do is traction, and anything that is not that is a distraction. So we can do these things without guilt, without shame, without thinking there's somehow this moral hierarchy between these various behaviors. That's the first dichotomy that's really important to understand, the difference between traction and distraction.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the whole getting people to go on digital detoxes and whatnot, I mean, ultimately it comes down to what you value. As opposed to digital minimalism, I guess you'd call it digital essentialism. Like, hey, you like communicating with your friends on Facebook Messenger for half an hour a day? Fine. If that brings value to your life, if these friends are distributed all over the world and they live in New York and London and wherever else, then that's one great way to stay in touch. There's nothing wrong with that. At its core, I mean, it's about living a life, like you said, with traction. It's about values alignment. What do you value? Where do you want to get to? And living in accordance with that.
That's exactly right. And so that's actually part of the process to becoming indistractable, is to turn your values into time, not in some big like vision board kind of hand wavy way, but to just sit down with the week ahead. So many people that I work with and have talked to over the years, they talk about, oh, my 5-year vision, or what do I want to do on my deathbed? And my response is, how about we just talk about next week, right? How can we give you an indistractable week next week? And so that is this fundamental step. The first step is mastering our internal triggers, which we touched upon a little bit, but we can get into some practical tips as well. But the second step is to make time for traction. And the way you do this is to turn your values into time. I mean, if we think about how much effort and money we put into protecting our stuff, right? We have home security systems, we have alarms in our cars, we put our money in banks with vaults in them. So, we put so much time and effort into protecting our stuff. But when it comes to our time, come on over, steal as much of it as you want.
2-hour meeting, no problem.
Yeah, sure thing. No worries. Yep. And we know that what's going to happen to that time we don't plan for, we're not going to use it to meditate or to pray or to write that novel, or, we know what we're going to do with it. We're going to putz around on some stupid thing online, which is not bad inherently in itself if we make time for it. So we have to turn our values into time. And we start with these 3 domains that I talk about in the book: your relationships, and finally your work. And most people do this in reverse, right? Maybe, so 2/3 of people don't even plan anything, right? 2/3 of people out there walk around with nothing on their calendar, complaining about how distracting the world is, okay? If you don't know what is traction, you have no right to say that you got distracted, because you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if your calendar is blank, everything is a distraction. So we have to plan our day. So 2/3 of people don't even plan anything in their day. The third that are left that do plan something in their day, they'll typically plan just work, right? Meetings, various things that they're drawn to throughout their day. Typically, time is spent reacting to stuff, reacting to emails, reacting to Slack channels, reacting to meetings. But very few of them actually schedule the other domains of their life. It's as if our only values are to be little automatons working all day. What about planning time for your most important relationships? What about planning time for yourself? So if your values include taking care of your physical health, is that on your calendar? If your values include being there for your family and loved ones, are you investing in those relationships, or do you just give them whatever scraps of time are left over? So making time for traction by turning your values into time is a very critical next step to becoming indistractable.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, there is I suppose, a temptation to fall victim to what you draw identity from. So if you derive a lot of identity from being an entrepreneur who's hashtag hustling for 14 hours a day, it's easier to just keep investing that time into work and sitting at your desk as opposed to going home and investing in that personal relationship. In fact, it's probably a lot easier for people. So taking that step back and really reflecting on, what do I really value? Who do I want to be in the world? And then making that time accordingly can actually free up that time to invest in your relationships. Otherwise, it's just so easy to just fall back to what you know and what's familiar.
Right. And the problem is, many of us believe, and I used to, by the way, all of this is autobiographical. I went through this 5-year journal. The reason it took me 5 years to write this book is because I kept getting distracted. Right? I didn't have the skills and the tool set that I needed to be able to work productively. That's why I wrote the book. I was patient zero here. And so what we see with a lot of people when it comes to scheduling their time, scheduling their day, is that there's this massive disconnect between what they say they want to do with their time and what they actually end up doing with their day. And so I had to learn these skills, just as much as anyone did. And so now the difference is that I know why I got distracted, as opposed to day after day going through your existence and keep getting distracted by the same things day after day. We would never want to lie to others. We all know that one of the worst put down someone could tell you is just call you a liar, right? You never want to lie to your friends or lie to your family. And yet, I was lying to myself every day. I would say I would work out, but I didn't. I would say I would eat right, but I wasn't. I would say I would finally get that thing done that I've been putting off at work, and I didn't. And so I just got sick of that. And I decided that, if I was going to live out my values, I had to figure out the root cause of the problem. Because, look, I knew what to do. Many of us do. Everybody these days. Who doesn't know how to get into shape? Can you find anybody out there who thinks that chocolate cake is healthier than a healthy salad? Of course not. Is there anybody out there who doesn't think that, to have a good relationship, you have to be fully present with people? Is there anybody that thinks that, to get ahead at work, that you don't have to actually do the work? We all know what to do. The answer isn't a secret. We already know. What we don't know is, how do we prevent ourselves from going off track? How do we prevent ourselves from getting distracted?
Yeah. So on that point, I had a conversation with Scott Belsky, the founder of Behance, a few months ago now, and something he said stuck in my mind since then, which was, in today's age, the ability to disconnect is a true scarce resource, and it can give us a competitive advantage. And so you alluded to this a few moments ago, that what we need to be doing first and foremost is reimagining the internal trigger. So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah. So to master these internal triggers, we have to see them differently. One starts with understanding that feeling bad is not bad, that it's perfectly normal to feel boredom, anxiety, uncertainty, fatigue. Totally normal. So, don't psych yourself out and think that there's something wrong with you. We tend to find when it comes to distraction that people fall into two buckets. Either we have what's called the blamers. The blamers say, oh, it's my iPhone, it's Facebook, it's the technology doing it to me. That's not very productive. I mean, if you hold your breath waiting for these companies to change, you're going to suffocate. So why wait? The other category of people are what we call the shamers. The shamers say, oh, you see, there's something wrong with me. I have a short attention span. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. And they shame themselves. And ironically, when you feel bad, right, we talked about earlier how all human behavior is prompted by a desire to escape discomfort. When you shame yourself, you are creating more of these internal triggers which you seek to escape from. So you become even more likely to get distracted when you shame yourself. So we don't want to be blamers. We don't want to be shamers. We want to be claimers. Claimers acknowledge that this isn't your fault. Okay? You didn't make the iPhone. You didn't invent email. You didn't make Facebook. It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. Because these technologies are not going away. And even if they did, we would find something else to get distracted by. Do you think, honestly, if Zuckerberg said, you know what, screw you all, I'm turning off Facebook, okay? It's going dark tomorrow. You think people are going to start reading Shakespeare and Chaucer in their spare time? Of course not. We're going to putz around with something else, just like we always have since the time of Plato. Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years ago. He called it akrasia. So you don't want to be a blamer. You don't want to be a shamer. You want to be a claimer, which says a claimer claims responsibility not for their feelings. Okay, this is an important point. You cannot control how you feel. You can only control how you respond to how you feel. And the first step to doing that, basically we can reimagine three things. We can reimagine the trigger, we can reimagine the task, and we can reimagine our temperament. So how do we reimagine our trigger? We reimagine the trigger by seeing that uncomfortable state differently and responding to it in a way that yields traction rather than distraction. So there's a lot in the book that we don't have time to cover today, but let me just give you one very solid technique that I use almost every single day. This comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. By the way, nothing that I preach is just my personal theory. I hate these self-help books that say, take a shower at 4 a.m. at freezing temperature, and that's going to be great. Why? Because it worked for me. Come on. I need more than that. So not only do these techniques work because I utilize them, but they are all backed by peer-reviewed studies. So there's like a 30-page appendix in the book. You can see all these citations. So there's this technique that comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's 30, 40-year-old psychology research that finds that if we can respond to these internal triggers in a healthier manner, that is a very effective technique to help us move us towards traction rather than distraction. So what we want to do when we experience one of these uncomfortable emotional states, the first thing that we can do is to simply write down that sensation. Just writing down what that feeling is. I'm feeling bored. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling uncertain. Whatever it might be, simply writing it down helps us gain control over it. Now, the next thing that we want to do, and this is a technique I use almost every day, this is called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule says that you can give in to any distraction. Whether it's that piece of chocolate cake you don't need, whether it's smoking that cigarette, whether it's checking Pinterest or ESPN or whatever, the news, when you really want to be doing that project you're working on. So the 10-minute rule says you can give into those things in just 10 minutes. Now, why not just say no? Why not just strict abstinence? Because we know that when we utilize strict abstinence, particularly about things that we can't escape, okay, we can't escape food. We have to eat. We can't escape technology. We need these things for our professional lives. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, when you just can't say no, those type of tactics of strict abstinence can actually backfire. It's sort of like if you think about a rubber band, right? If you pull on a rubber band, it gets tighter until you can't pull it back anymore. And then finally it releases. The rubber band doesn't just go where it started. No, it ricochets even farther. And so that's actually something similar to what's happening in the brain. When you tell yourself, don't do it. Okay, fine, I'll give in. That actually registers in the brain, back to what we said earlier about how all behavior is prompted by a desire to escape discomfort. By releasing the discomfort of telling yourself don't do something, the brain registers that as pleasure. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, think about this physiologically. If you really have to go pee, and you hold it, and then, sweet relief, that feels good. That's exactly what happens to a smoker. That's exactly what happens to us when we tell ourselves, don't check the technology, don't eat that piece of chocolate cake. So strict abstinence has been shown to actually reinforce the behavior you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. So instead of strict abstinence, you tell yourself, I can give into that distraction in just 10 minutes of doing what's called surfing the urge. Here's how surfing the urge works. When you find you're about to get distracted, you tell yourself, okay, I can give into that distraction in just 10 minutes, and I have a choice to make. I can either do the thing that I was previously working on, right? I can get back to the task at hand, or I can contemplate, I can explore this sensation with curiosity rather than contempt, okay? To just sit with that feeling. What am I experiencing right now? Where is this coming from? Why am I stressed? Why am I anxious? Am I bored? What's going on right now? And by simply exploring that sensation for just 10 minutes, right? It's all I want you to do, 10 minutes of surfing the urge. You will find that 99% of the time, you will be back at the task at hand rather than giving into that temptation by reimagining that internal trigger using this technique of the 10-minute rule. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of other techniques, but that's just one that I use almost every single day.
Yeah, and for people who are listening to this, they sit down at their desk tomorrow and they've got the urge to, check LinkedIn, and they sit with themselves, they meditate during that 10-minute rule. And they might
don't meditate.
Not meditate, but they meditate. They reflect on that feeling inside themselves. And they might find it difficult to do that. But ultimately, like any new thing, any new habit, it takes time to form that. And something...
No. Meditation is hard.
Meditation is hard, yeah.
Meditation is hard. This is not meditation. This is contemplation. Mm-hmm. And so what I want you to do, then anybody can do this. This doesn't take practice. The only thing that takes practice is that the creating space between the trigger, between the boredom, the anxiety, the loneliness, the fatigue, and the action.
Yeah.
Okay. When you feel bored right now, you have some kind of impulse. Check the news, check stock prices, sports scores, whatever it might be. You're doing that impulsively. The part that takes practice is simply noticing that, oh, wait a minute, why am I going to these distractions? Why am I not doing what I said I'm going to do? The part about the 10 minutes of contemplation, that's super easy, right? You're basically just having a conversation with yourself the way you would talk to a good friend. That's all you're doing. It's not hard at all. It doesn't take any practice. The only part that takes practice is changing the habit of instantaneously reaching for the Facebook or email or whatever it is you do currently to distract yourself.
Yeah. And then that's essentially what I was referring to in terms of building that habit to interject before checking and just taking that time to contemplate, as you say. So essentially, we won't spend too much time touching on all of the different ways you can hack back those external triggers. But one thing I wanted to explore today was work and the fact that people have only so much control over their work environment. And oftentimes, especially in big corporates, they are falling victim to this tendency to prioritize arbitrary urgency over important things. But secondly, and you've alluded to this in your book as well, I mean, today's work culture is somewhat toxic, especially the larger the company is, the less trust there is, the more emphasis there is on process and on outsourcing accountability and gaining consensus. And this ultimately leaves people checking email and just attending lots of meetings and getting tapped on the shoulder all day long at the expense of actually getting their work done. So for someone who, say, is an executive in a large company and perhaps only has so much latitude over how their day looks, what do you suggest?
Yeah, so I think you hit on a great point here in that, that there's only so much we can do ourselves, that half of the book, half of Indistractable is about what you can do on your own. So there's these 4 steps to becoming indistractable: master your internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with pacts. That's the formula for becoming indistractable. But we also need to recognize that we work in environments, and environments can change our behavior. And so the second half of the book is about how do you build an indistractable workplace? How do you raise indistractable kids? How do you have indistractable relationships? And when it comes to the workplace, this is a really important point, and you bring it up, very eloquently, that, look, if you're home with your kids and you're having dinner with your family, and 8 o'clock at night your boss decides to call you on the phone and says, "Hey, I need you to do something right now," is it the telephone that your boss used that's at fault? Is it the technology that's doing it to us? Or is it the fact that you work at a company with a crappy culture where that's somehow acceptable? Clearly, it's the crappy culture. And I think this is a really important distinction because, the bandwagon right now is that everybody moans about the technology. The technology is doing it to us, but clearly it's how the technology is used. And so I argue that distraction in the workplace is a symptom of cultural dysfunction. That, one of the technologies that I constantly heard was a source of distraction in people's lives. The most distracting technology was email. And there's a whole chapter in there about how to reduce the time you spend on email by up to 90%. But the number 2 technology that people most complained about was Slack or some kind of other group chat app. So I went to visit Slack. Slack is the world's largest group chat app, and you would think if it's the technology that's causing the problem, well, nobody uses Slack more than the people who work at Slack. They should be the most distracted people on earth. But that's not what I found. That in fact, if you walk into Slack headquarters at 6:30, the office is empty, and if you use Slack on nights and weekends, you are reprimanded. That is not what they do at Slack. It is part of their company culture that is not acceptable. So I profiled 2 companies, Slack and the Boston Consulting Group. These 2 companies that have proven that distraction is not caused by the technology. The technology perpetuates a toxic work culture that is the root cause of distraction. So here are the 3 elements of a company that does not struggle with distraction. Number 1, they give employees psychological safety. So psychological safety is the ability to talk about your problems without fear of retribution, without fear of getting fired. And so what we find is at these companies like Slack, like at the Boston Consulting Group, you can raise your hand and say, you know what, this isn't working out for me. This is not good. Can we talk about it and try and find some solution to the problem? And lo and behold, they do because it's not that hard of a problem. right? You can find ways to fix this problem of distraction if you recognize that the source of the problem of distraction is the fact that we can't talk about the problem of distraction. That is the root problem. That companies where people, they're scared because they think they're going to get fired if they talk about the problem, that's the real source of the problem. The second factor is that they give employees a forum to talk about these issues, right? So at Slack, they actually have a dedicated Slack channel called Beef Tweets, where people can talk about their beef with the company, their complaints about the company. At BCG, they have these weekly meetings about where they talk about what's called predictable time off to make sure everybody has the time to disconnect so that they could do other things in their life. And so having some kind of place, some kind of forum is the second criteria. So number one is psychological safety. Number two is a forum to talk about these issues. And number three, and most importantly, is that at these companies that don't struggle with distraction, these indistractable companies, management exemplifies what it means to be indistractable, right? You can't talk a good game and say, oh, we want work-life balance while you're constantly emailing and pinging and dinging your employees. It doesn't work that way. So if you walk into Slack headquarters, I saw something amazing when I went to Slack headquarters in San Francisco. They have in big pink letters written on the wall, it says, work hard and go home. They literally wrote that on the wall, work hard and go home. Because at that company, part of the company culture, from Stuart Butterfield, the CEO, on down, that is what they believe. It's part of the company ethos. And so they display that, because culture flows downhill. It starts from management on down. So management can have a profound impact on how people manage their time and how distracted they are. But I know many people who say, well, look, I'm not the boss. What am I going to do? How can I affect change? Of course, if you are the boss, you're on warning now. You have no excuse. You can change this right now in your company. But let's say you're not the boss. What do you do? Well, you start by changing yourself. Okay, there's so much that you can do to become indistractable yourself. And by becoming indistractable, and you can see in the book, some of what I preach in the book is about interacting with your manager, managing up to show them how you can better manage your time. And of course, those techniques are going to rub off on them as well. And then what we're going to do is we expand out, right? We share these techniques maybe with our colleagues, our direct reports, our case teams. That's what happened at the Boston Consulting Group. They started with one case team of 8 people, and this team did so well. They found that employee churn went way down, happiness, job satisfaction, all of these things rocketed up. And so from that small case team, they utilized these techniques throughout the organization.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Slack because it sounds like they may be, and this could be me thinking out loud, but somewhat of a disconnect between how they run their culture and what they project to their consumers. Because I know the last time I logged into Slack, there was a little notification that popped up at the top of my screen urging me to, we strongly recommend that you turn on notifications. And I thought, no, I'm going to leave them off.
Yeah. Well, again, it's how you use this stuff, right?
Yeah,
it's about, do you, Jason Fried, the founder of Basecamp, says that group chat should be like a hot tub. You get into the hot tub, then you get out of the hot tub. You don't stay in the hot tub all day long. That's gross. You're going to get pruny. So it's about, when you get in and when you get out. And I think, and I give there's a whole chapter in the book about how to hack back group chat to make sure that it serves you as opposed to you feeling like you're serving it. Yeah.
And Jason Fried, I had him on the show, and one thing he's a big proponent of is asynchronous communication. Right. So
absolutely, yeah.
You don't feel the need to be hyper responsive and respond to every email or instant message within 5 minutes, which I think points to, the toxic culture, but also some form of insecurity with one's capabilities. Because, if I don't respond in 5 minutes, they're going to fire me. Yeah.
There's actually some research that shows, I talk about this in the book in the opening section about why distraction at work is a symptom of cultural dysfunction. I talk about these 2 criteria that they found in the workplace that literally cause anxiety and depression disorder. That there's a certain type of workplace that literally is driving us crazy. And it's not what you do. When I first heard about this research and I thought to myself, I wonder what kind of job leads to depression and anxiety disorder. I would have thought it would be, a sad job if you are a mortician, or maybe you have to, put down animals if you're a veterinarian. That would be a sad job. Turns out what you do has nothing to do with it. It's about what environment you do it in. And so it's the confluence of these two factors. Work, and this is the work of Stansfield and Candy. They've shown that the confluence of a work environment with high expectations coupled with low control. Okay. If you have high expectations and high control, you're fine. You can flourish. But if you have high expectations with low control, that is a toxic work environment. And what do people do when they feel more anxious, when they feel the symptoms of depression? What do? More internal triggers. And so what do they become more likely to do? They get distracted. But not only do they distract themselves because of all those internal triggers they don't know how to cope with, they look for ways to increase their agency. How do they do that? They send more stupid emails. They call more superfluous meetings that don't need to be called, all for this need to get greater agency and control over something that feels out of control. And so not only are they distracting themselves, they're distracting everyone else as well because of this toxic work environment where people don't feel in control.
Yeah. And I've come across that research on a lack of control and the correlation with just emotional well-being or just depression, essentially. And I mean, on the other side of that is not only depression, but if you are checking email 72 times a day, which is a statistic I came across, that's like once every, 6 to 7 minutes in a standard 9 to 5 workday. That also suggests that you're spending very little time in what psychologists call the flow state, where we are in the zone, we're doing our best work, where we're typing away and we look at the time and it's, oh my God, 3 hours have gone by. Where did that time go? And I know from my own experience, whether it's writing or doing something else, that is such a rewarding, fulfilling feeling when you come out of that little rabbit hole that today's executives and entrepreneurs and whatnot may be missing out on. But not only do they miss out on that feeling, the quality of the work also suffers. I mean, if we are always operating at that shallow end of the pool, never getting into the deep end, the quality of our outcomes and the outcomes that our organization delivers are just going to suffer. And then collectively, like if you take this and apply it across the entire world, because it is a pervasive issue. I mean, it's nothing short of tragic to my mind.
That's right. No, that is absolutely the case, that if we are constantly interrupted, we cannot do our best work. I think something I'd like to focus a spotlight on is, because we beat up on tech so much, we forget about all the other sources of distraction. So the third step to becoming indistractable is about hacking back the external triggers. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I talk about the usual suspects of hacking back your phone, hacking back your computer, making sure that you can change, your web experience so that you're not constantly being distracted. But I think we should also focus on the external triggers that people don't think about. For example, the open floor plan office, right? It's a hotbed of distraction. I mean, how many times if you work in an open floor plan office, someone will catch your eye or tap you on the shoulder and say, oh my God, you won't believe this bit of office gossip, or let me just tell you something for 10 minutes. That can be just as much of a distraction, probably more so than the pings and dings on our phone, is that tap on the shoulder from a colleague. And so what do you do about that? So in every copy of Indistractable, there is a pull-out screen sign. It's a piece of cardstock that you rip out of the book, you fold into thirds, you put it on your computer monitor, you put it on your screen, and it's bright red, and it says, I am indistractable, please come back later. Okay, It's an explicit message to your colleagues. I can't talk right now, I'm working on something. Now, I'm not saying leave this up all day. Okay. But for the hour, maybe an hour and a half that you need to do focused work in your day, this is something that can tell your colleagues, hey, look, I can't be bothered right now. Now people say, well, that's what I put on headphones for, right? Not really. Because when you put on headphones, people think you're watching YouTube videos. So they need that explicit message to say, nope, I can't talk right now. And if they do tap you on the shoulder, you just point to that screen sign and it gives them the clue so that they won't keep doing it. And once we start seeing this in the office, right? Once one person does it, 2 people do it, 3 people do it, now it becomes part of the company culture to give people the time and the space to think, for God's sakes. Thinking these days is a competitive advantage. Right? We're so busy reacting to stuff, reacting to emails, reacting to meetings, reacting to Slack messages that we have no time for reflection. So, just the ability to sit and think, to strategize is critical for many of our jobs. And yet we allocate almost no time for doing it.
Yeah. And I did come across a study, and I'll add this to the show notes, but just on open plan offices, even if you don't get that proverbial tap on the shoulder, just the lateral movement of people and activity can be enough to actually harm your focus.
It's true. It's not ideal. It's true. But, I try and look for change where you can actually make change. Do a digital detox. Come on, give me a break. You need these things for our livelihood. You're going to tell someone, please don't use email for 30 days. You're going to get fired. So why would I even recommend that? Why would I recommend, go to, work somewhere without an open floor plan office? Come on. I mean, this saves companies so much money in real estate. It's not going away. It's here to stay. Instead, we can find ways to adapt these environments to make sure that we can protect our focus.
Yeah. Yeah, and just trying to exercise more agency over your work. And, like you said, go from Snowflake to Avalanche. You had that case group at BCG, I believe it was. Have a small group that tries different things. And then if that works, scale it up. And with something like open plan offices, you might do your best work in a quiet space. Well, I know organizations are investing in those quiet spaces, but if you can earn the right to at least work remotely from a quiet space, be it at home or somewhere else for 2 hours a day, and then when you are in the office, that's for meetings, that's for other forms of activities that require collaboration with other people.
Sure.
But that takes time, and it's just a matter of exercising that agency.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different techniques in the book, and the techniques can be adapted for everyone's situation. I think if you look at them and you are looking for why this won't work, of course they won't work. If you're looking for how can they be adapted for your particular situation, you'll find a way to make it work. Mm-hmm. But I think much more important than the particular tricks and tips or techniques, what's much more important is the strategy, is understanding the difference between traction and distraction, external triggers and internal triggers that prompt you towards traction and distraction. That's a much more important view. And that's really what I want to add to the conversation, because when you can look at the strategy, when you can look at this picture of, the two arrows pointing out of traction and distraction, and then understand, well, there's only two things that prompt you towards action, which is an external trigger and an internal trigger. Now you know what to do about the problem. Paulo Coelho said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just so great when it comes to dealing with distraction, because as much as we moan and complain about of distraction, we have made the decision, many of us, to allow distraction to get the best of us every day, day in and day out. Well, now you can stop and think about this and say, wait a minute, why did I get distracted? Was it an external trigger? Well, how can I hack back that external trigger? Was it an internal trigger? Well, how can I learn to master that internal trigger? Or was it a planning problem? That's it. Every distraction only has three potential causes: an external trigger, an internal trigger, or a planning problem. That is the source of every single distraction in our life. And now we have a system to actually do something about those distractions.
Yeah, and I think it was Marcus Aurelius who said, this action will take me closer to my goal, and this action will take me further away from it. And essentially reflecting on that when you are sitting down to your desk or whatever form of work you partake in, essentially. But one other thing that I wanted to touch on today, and you alluded to it a little moment ago as well, was pacts. And you talk about these in your book, pacts on price, effort, and identity. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is the fourth and final step, and it's only to be used last, because if you use it incorrectly, it will backfire. So this one is the most dangerous of the three strategies. So after you've mastered the internal triggers, after you've made time for traction, after you've hacked back the external triggers, this last step is about preventing distraction with pacts. So pacts are what we call in the psychology community a pre-commitment device. It's when we use a promise with ourselves or with someone else to make sure we do what we say we're going to do. So there are three types of pacts. The first one is called an effort pact. An effort pact is when you put some bit of friction, something in between you and something you don't want to do. So in my case, we're all adults here. I'm going to tell you about my sex life. So in my household, I've been married now for 18 years. And a few years ago, my wife and I noticed that night after night, we would go to bed later and later because she was caressing her iPhone and I was stroking my iPad, and we weren't being intimate. Yeah. And so we decided to do something about it. And we went to the hardware store and got a $10 outlet timer. Now, this outlet timer plugs into our wall outlet, and whatever you plug into it will turn off at a certain time of day or night. And so we plugged our internet router into that wall outlet timer so that every night at 10 p.m., our router shuts off. Now, could I turn the internet back on? Of course I could. I could go fiddle with it and unplug it and replug it. But I put a bit of friction, a bit of work in between me and something I didn't want to do, stay online too late, so that I don't get distracted. Okay. So now actually, this was a few years ago. Now you can actually buy internet routers with this feature built right in. It'll turn certain devices on and off so that you can keep your smart home on, but keep your smartphone off at certain times of day or night. So that's one example of an effort pact. And of course, there's many others as well. Then you have what's called a price pact. Price pacts are when we have some kind of financial disincentive to getting distracted. And this comes from research that found that when people bet just a little bit of money, in this case $150, that they would not smoke, they were much more likely, they were 5 times more likely than the control group to stop smoking. This was actually seen to be the most effective smoking cessation study in history. And all it took was a $150 bet, right? And so having some skin in the game, having some monetary disincentive to getting distracted can be very, very effective. So in order to finish my book, Indistractable, I made a bet with my writing buddy, Mark, and I bet him after 4 years of research, I said, look, I have to get this book done. If I don't finish my manuscript by January 1st, I will pay you $10,000. Mm-hmm. You think I paid him the $10,000? Of course I didn't. By the way, that amount, it just has to be something that hurts for you. It has to be something meaningful. So it can be any amount that would hurt. But of course I didn't pay him the money. I kept my money and I finished my manuscript because I know that the price of getting distracted would be more than I could bear. And I know many people are scared of this. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure if I could do it. Yeah, you know what that is? That is fear talking, because you might have to actually do the thing you want to do. But of course, we pay so much money to writing coaches and to weight loss programs and to fitness coaches when really we know what to do. We just need the incentive to actually do it. So sometimes these price packs can be very effective. Again, have to remind you, you have to do it last. If you don't do the other 3 things first, it will backfire. And sometimes that means you're going to lose that money. So make sure you do the other 3 steps first before you do this. And the last type of pact, and maybe the most interesting, I think, is what's called an identity pact. An identity pact is when we shape our self-image in such a way that keeps us on track, because fundamentally, behavior change is identity change. And so this comes from the research around the psychology of religion. And we know that when someone has a moniker, right, when you call yourself a devout Christian, a devout Muslim, even a vegetarian, when you have some kind of noun by which you describe yourself as opposed to a verb tense, as opposed to saying I don't eat meat, when you say I am a vegetarian, you become much more likely to do what it is you say you are going to do. So a vegetarian doesn't say, I wonder if I'm going to have that hamburger today. No, a vegetarian doesn't eat meat, and it's no big deal. They don't have to struggle with making the right choice because it's who they are. And so this is why my book is called Indistractable, because I want people to adopt this moniker, just like we did back in the 1980s. So I remember in the 1980s, some of my first memories, I remember people would come to my home, as they did everyone's home back then, and just light up a cigarette in your living room. That's what people did, right? They just lit up a cigarette in your living room without even asking. People did this all the time. If you don't remember the early 80s, this will make no sense to you, because today that would be ludicrous. Could you imagine how rude that would be if someone lit up a cigarette in your home? So what happened? How did that change? Was there a law that said you can't smoke in someone's living room? No, there's never been such a law. What changes are norms changed. And I remember when my mom said, hey, we are non-smokers. If you want to smoke, please go outside. She lost friends. People thought this was incredibly rude to ask them to go outside to smoke. And so what we need today is the same shift. We need to spread what is called social antibodies. We need to inoculate society so that people get the message on when is the appropriate time or the inappropriate time to use these devices. And so we are going through something very similar to what happened in the 1980s when it came to smoking. So that's why the book is called Indistractable. I'm looking for these people who say, you know what? Yeah, I do a few weird things, okay? I don't respond to every text message and email in 30 seconds. I put this screen sign on my computer monitor to tell people when I need focused work. I do some things that are a little bit unusual. But is it any more unusual than somebody who eats a strange diet like a vegetarian might? Maybe that's unusual. Or someone who wears unusual religious garb? Or someone who, in the 1980s said, please don't smoke in my home? No, these behaviors will become the norm if we proudly proclaim I'm indistractable. That's my identity. That's who I am. And so this is why I behave the way I do.
Fantastic. And I absolutely love what you said there about identity pacts as well. Throughout this conversation, there's been a tendency to draw a delicate balance between tools being good for us or bad for us. Ultimately, it comes down to how you use it. And with identity packs, social media can be a tool for good. I mean, you could proudly proclaim that I am a keto warrior or something like that on your social media profile on Instagram. And suddenly, hey, 80% of your calories are going to come from fat. Like, you're not going to stray from that, or at least when you're in public, right? I don't know what the case is, but ultimately, you can use social media to label yourself and then become far more likely to espouse the kinds of values and behaviors that you want to be associated with, essentially.
Right. And so that's what being Indistractable is all about. It's not about, saying, oh, I don't use technology. That's ridiculous. We can get the best of these tools without letting them get the best of us. That's what being Indistractable is all about. It's about striving to be the kind of person you want to be, striving to live with personal integrity by doing what it is you say you are going to do.
Fantastic. And I think that's a beautiful place to end this conversation here. If people want to pick up a copy of the book, of course, they can do so over on Amazon. They can hit you up on Twitter at NIREYAL, Nir Eyal, and they can check you out on your website at nirandfar.com, which I think is an absolute awesome URL as well, by the way.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gliveski and on Instagram at TheSteveGliveski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.